Welcome to the Spiritual Life Management Podcast, where we help you bring balance in your life and live to your fullest potential. With your host, Gretchen Smith. Welcome to another episode of Spiritual Life Management Podcast. Today we'll be discussing STE, or spiritual transformative experiences, divine encounters, mystical transformations, spiritual synchronicities, and overcoming domestic abuse. My guest is Dr. Marni Hill Foderaro, who is an award-winning and celebrated author, speaker, and educator. Marni is a contributing author to numerous anthology books. In January 2022, Marni was inducted into the Best-Selling Authors International organization. Marni's 2020 Best Books Award, God Came to My Garage Sale, is prominently endorsed by James Redfield, best-selling author of the Celestine Prophecy series of books. Marni's life was forever changed after experiencing numerous trauma-induced STEs, spiritually transformative encounters. Welcome to the show, Marni.
Oh, hey, Gretchen. Thank you so much for having me on here.
My absolute pleasure. I am so excited to have you on the show. And I have to say that when you reached out to me and I read God Came to My Garage Sale, you had me right there. That is so catchy and very, very interesting. So let's just start right there.
Well, sure. I was having a life change. I decided to leave my American dream, leave a marriage after 27 years, found that the house I thought was paid off was not. So I had to basically leave and sell everything that I could, and had so many significant losses. But, in the midst of that kind of trauma, I still was filled with love and gratitude and just had a positive outlook for, what was ahead of me. And so I had this garage sale, but instead of having any negative feelings or sadness, or even anger, I just was filled with love. And because of that, I believe there were signs and synchronicities that were brought to my attention. And I had basically a spiritual awakening after I've kind of analyzed everything that I went through. So I had so many different miracles that just gave me the feeling that I was loved and supported by some sort of divine power. And I kept on questioning, boy, did God come to the garage sale? Is this person God? Is this scenario God? And so, just like many other people that have kind of transformational experiences, you're compelled to write about it or talk about it. And that's what I did with my spiritual fiction, God Came to My Garage Sale.
I love that. So, just to clarify, you literally had a garage sale and then
Yeah.
you wrote a fictional book about your experience.
Right. I did. So yes, I've had many garage sales in my life, and I've gone to many, but at this particular one, just before, during, and shortly after, some miracles did happen. And I did choose to write a spiritual fiction, because I was leaving this marriage and realizing that, my values of honesty and goodness and fidelity, and I mean, just so many different things, my values did not align with my ex-husband's. I was still sort of in a kind of shock mode and survival, fear mode. I wasn't comfortable writing a true story of everything that happened. So, I changed the names and the locations and that kind of thing. And I probably didn't need to do that, but that's what I chose to do. So, really, all of the experiences that I write about in this spiritual fiction were inspired by true, actual events.
Mm-hmm. And those are the STEs, correct?
Yes. I, when after I had these experiences, some of them I realized were just otherworldly immediately. And then there were others that I just kind of buried a little deep into my subconscious, but with a trigger or with some sort of prompt of sorts, it brought the memory and experience back to my attention. And so, I ended up doing a lot of research. I'm someone who really needed some validation and proof when it came to spirituality. I didn't have a foundation of organized religion or any kind of concept of a higher power growing up. I was raised in an atheist household. So, on my own, though, mostly when I started college, I just knew to explore something more because to me, there were so many answers that I needed to the just questions that we all have, like what happens when we die, or how do bad things happen to so many people, or how wonderful and intricate is nature. And just even when you think about our human bodies, they're just miracles. And I knew there
Right.
had to be a divine source to this. So I would seek this out. But after having these experiences at the garage sale, I took it a step further and I started attending IONS conferences and meetings. IONS stands for the International Association for Near Death Studies.
Mhm.
And I was fortunate to have the opportunity to listen to hundreds of accounts of people that have had near death experiences or STEs, which are spiritually transformative encounters or experiences. Um, that's a little bit different in that you don't physically die and flatline, but you can still experience some of the miracles that people do when they actually leave their body and then eventually return to it to be able to share their experiences.
Right. And I'm so happy we're talking about this today because I would have to say people have heard of NDEs or those type of experiences, but not necessarily the STEs, or they don't consider them. And so I'm loving the fact that we're talking about it and we're making more people aware of it today too.
Right. And actually, there's an amazing organization called SAI, which is Spiritual Awakenings International. And it is founded by Dr. Yvonne Kaysen. And she has spoken numerous times at IONS conferences. She has had, I believe, at least 5 near death experiences herself. But she also had numerous spiritually transformative encounters that were somewhat different than when you actually physically died. And then she did a lot of research on this phenomenon, and there's scientific proof that this isn't in just people's imaginations.
Right.
It's just something that wasn't talked about a lot. And actually, even with NDEs, the research is just overwhelmingly supportive that there's scientific proof to these events happening. So Dr. Yvonne Kaysen has this other organization, and I was so honored a couple months ago to speak at their international conference. I was one of many presenters that talked about some of these experiences. And in my case, they were trauma induced. I believe that I was, experiencing such a life change that just, got me at my core being to just really be in shock. I was the one who chose to leave this marriage and this life, but I had no idea that I would even lose adult children to parental alienation. Just as well as I didn't believe that after all these years of being a successful teacher, and yes, I'm guilty of handing over my paycheck every month and that type of thing, I was left with nothing, no home, no savings, extreme debt that wasn't even mine, a lot of it. So, um, I was just really shocked to my core. And so my experiences, I believed, are as a result of that shock. And it turns out a lot of people that have had STEs also have some sort of trauma, whether it's a car accident, whether it's losing a loved one, whether it's even losing a job. Trauma and shock look very different for different people. So, even though I made the choice to leave this, I was shocked at the repercussions I wasn't really prepared for. But I think because of that extreme darkness, I was shown the light in so many ways. And, the optimism and positivity that has always been the core of who I am just, even increased further.
Wow, yes. I'm so glad you touched on the fact that a lot of people have different types of traumas. And a lot of those traumas, although they may look different, they can often result into some sort of a spiritual awakening, if you will. It may not even be an STE, but it can be an awakening. And I know for myself, that is when I experienced my spiritual awakening. I would say that it was more of a dark night of the soul
Hmm.
situation, if you will. But it was after enduring months and months, actually years of stress and trauma, which was the product of, if you will, a what we're going to get into a little bit later here, an abusive relationship, and it has to do with narcissism. And it was going through the divorce process where I too lost everything. And I thought, how am I ever going to get through it? And I just kept having this knowing that something bigger is coming, something bigger is happening. I could feel almost a spiritual presence, but I didn't have the STE experience that you did. And I would love for you to get into some of those encounters that you've had because they're absolutely incredible.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And also, Gretchen, just thank you also for sharing that, your story is very similar to mine, and targets of abuse, whether they're men or women, whether it's in a marital situation or a close friend or a neighbor or even a work relationship, they can really take you by surprise and really shock you to the core. And so, yes, a lot of these experiences and awakenings happen after you have been through some very dark times. But yeah, there are many different experiences that I have written about, and in my spiritual fiction, like I said, was all based on true experiences. But one of the most significant ones happened in the beginning when I was out at the cul-de-sac, just looking back at my home and really being thankful that, even though I had lost my adult children to parental alienation, I was so happy that I had a place to raise them for 20 years. And so, I was kind of looking at the glass half full.
Mhm.
Um, but, all of a sudden a dragonfly circled me and I thought, wow, that's pretty neat. But I didn't think anything of that, even when there were like five dragonflies. But within a very, very short time, there were 50 and to what I believe about 100 dragonflies circling me.
Wow.
And I could see them in slow motion flying down the road of my block and coming back and circling me. And I was kind of just stuck. I wasn't scared, I wasn't overly excited, I wasn't ignoring it, I was just present experiencing this. And like I said, it was in complete slow motion, so much so that I could see the veins of the wings and the iridescent colors, and I could see the different sizes of the dragonflies. There were babies and toddlers and teenagers and young adults and grandparents. That I equated these dragonflies with people and generations, and I didn't know who they were. I didn't know if they were my own family, if they were people from the neighborhood. I just knew I was engulfed and surrounded with love and support. And the feeling that I got was that, hey, Marnie, you're going to be okay. Yes, you made this decision. And yeah, it took you a long time to make that decision. You ignored red flags for how many years? You know,
Right.
but I finally got the courage and strength. And of course, there was a defining moment that just said, I said to myself, enough is enough. And I didn't plan my escape the way I probably should have. I think I would have had a more comfortable exit if I had done a little bit of planning and a little investigating into what was happening with our finances, that which were always constantly being manipulated, so much so that it was just like, I almost didn't want anything to do with it because of the constant juggling of funds and credit cards maxing out and all of this stuff.
Hmm.
um, that I was not really aware of. But anyway, getting back to the experience, I just felt a knowing. Like, you said your experience, you were kind of given a knowing. I
Yes.
had that knowing that I would be okay. And actually, all the other experiences that I, and encountered were all pretty much in slow motion, where time just stands still, and it's always unexpected. I can manifest some things, but I usually can't manifest these encounters. But I'm always in a state of gratitude and filled with love and just peace. I'm at peace. I'm calm, and it's almost like spirit. They know that I'm in that kind of state, and then says, "Okay, I'm going to show you one more thing to open up your eyes that there is more to this earth than what you previously thought."
Yes. I love that. And it's almost like you have to slow down enough to recognize what is around you. Sometimes we're moving so fast that we don't see that we're supported and we're surrounded by love and we're supported and surrounded by the universe and we're going to be okay. And I think it's one or the other. We have to slow down enough to see the signs, or something traumatic has to happen to make us stop and see the signs.
Right, most definitely. And if you find yourself in an abusive or toxic situation, part of that experience involves gaslighting, where
Absolutely.
your abuser will slowly set things up so that you kind of question reality, you question your own worth and your own abilities. It doesn't matter how accomplished you are, how successful, how grounded you may seem. You can slowly have your confidence whittled away by someone who is very calculating and skilled at this type of behavior. So gaslighting, I think, can contribute to, you not being grounded and at peace, and because you're always kind of questioning reality, even though you know what you saw, you know what you
Mhm.
heard, you know what you experienced. They will say, no, 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 you didn't see that, you didn't hear that, nope, that you didn't even experience that. That's just kind of, how you're interpreting it. And that's just one of the many strategies that happen. And we tend to targeted people that are usually very empathetic, loving souls. We take on a lot. We not only take on other people's emotions, we take on, chores, and we take care of everything, home and family, while the other person is kind of leading a double or triple or quadruple life somewhere else. You're kind of left to bring home the bacon and fry it up in the pan, and what you do is you do get kind of frazzled because you're on autopilot doing so much. It does take a traumatic experience for most of us to just have to stop and reflect. And then a big part of this, Gretchen, I believe, is trying to do the deep dive into our own role in whatever situation we find ourselves in. This is very different than taking on the responsibility for being abused, because no one deserves that. But we can also look at what made us a target for this type of abuser, what made us the kind of person that will stay in situations way longer than we should, or what makes us an overgiver and,
Yes.
a people pleaser. And I think that's very important, and that's another level of the healing, and it's extremely painful. At least it was for me to have to look back into my own family dynamics, my parents, and how they interacted, and how they interacted with the children, and realizing that, you mentioned narcissism, that you it's hard to admit, but there's narcissism in families, and you don't want to believe that that is so. You want to believe that, your parents always have your best interests in mind. But no, there could be some qualities there that, of course, no one's diagnosed, and we're not here to diagnose people. But, definitely when you think of the definition of the various types of narcissism, you can see some similar behaviors and patterns. And then you have to make some tough decisions about, do you go low contact? Do you go no contact? Do you confront the situation, or do you just quietly walk away and preserve yourself?
Right. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Before we get into this any further, I just want to mention that you are actually an author of 5 book series. It's entitled True Deceit False Love.
Yes, yes. And I'm working on a sixth book right now.
Oh, wonderful. And that one will, do you know what it's going to be titled?
Well, it's all in the True Deceit False Love series. So all of them
Okay.
are titled with that. They just have subtitles depending on what they are. But yes, I wrote this 5 book series that is just prominently endorsed by many people in the abuse recovery community. Very well known influencers that saw the creative approach that I was using to these books and wanted to support it, which was just so awesome, extremely validating.
Exactly. So, yes, and that's how we're kind of tying all of this together because as a result of some of the issues that you're experiencing in your relationship, you're ending your relationship and then you have this STE at your garage sale, which is
Right.
just incredible, and it sends you on a spiritual journey, so to speak.
Right, right. And the dragonfly experience was just one of many. And I coined them all in, this spiritual fiction so that I could express some of the amazing things that I experienced. But yes, it is all very much related. The trauma, the relationship situation, the spiritual transformative experience, and then finding my voice, especially through my pen, so I could write, really go through some healing with the result of my books. And the first book in the True Deceit False Love series is 15,555 terms and phrases on domestic violence, narcissistic abuse, parental alienation, and intergenerational family trauma. And then the second book, which, in many ways is my favorite book in the series, and they're all brightly colored. The first book is blue, the second book is green. Um, it involves acrostic poetry that is informational about various terms that are thrown about when you're trying to understand domestic abuse and family trauma. And, I write these poems not so much autobiographical at all. It's more from many different points of view, from the abuser's point of view, or the victim's point of view, or a child, or a grandparent, or even a boss and employee situation. But there are over 300 acrostic poems. In that second book. And then the third book, which is a red book, it is a survivor's workbook. So if people find that writing might be a tool they could use to help work through their trauma, they could create some of their own acrostic poetry. And the fourth book, I left the rules behind and just did free verse poetry. And my fifth book is very unusual, but it is now a bestseller. It is a word search puzzle book having to do with all of these terms. And so, like, you could have a phrase like flying monkeys, which is a term that's thrown about. But then there's lots of different related words or phrases having to do with flying monkeys. And then you get to kind of distract yourself and relax a little bit while you are just putting the pieces of the puzzle together, no pun intended, but you are doing a word search. And, while you figure out each word, whether you know it or not, you are kind of connecting the dots to your own experience. So it's provides extreme healing in a very unconventional way.
Yes. And so many terms we may not even be familiar with or realize that they're a form of abuse. For instance, when I was going through my situation, I didn't come from a family that had any type of abuse in it. I wasn't raised in that type of environment. I got married very young, and I didn't have any red flags at that time, so to speak. However, of course, shortly after, I started seeing some red flags, but I didn't know what they were. I didn't even know how to articulate it.
Right, right. And you and as a good person, Gretchen, you want to make excuses for other people. Oh, they didn't mean to say that. Or,
Yes.
and that's kind of where the gaslighting comes in. Like, maybe I didn't see this correctly, and I'll just let it go and keep the peace, and it'll get better. And because there are so much intermittent reinforcement, there's good times with bad times. You are trauma bonded and you're stuck. And so
Yes.
you can't beat yourself up that you didn't see these red flags, or even know what they were, because of the good person that you are. You don't, because you don't think this way. You don't think like a criminal. You don't think like someone who's out to hurt people. We don't believe that the people we surround ourselves with are capable of doing that to us.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And the term gaslighting, which I experienced so much of, I didn't even know that term at the time. It wasn't used the way it is today. I had absolutely no idea.
And I didn't know either, so that's okay. And I'm someone who has taken even postdoctoral psychology classes that even have talked about these things. But I think when you're in the midst of being on the receiving end of this abuse, you don't connect the dots. Like, even if you might know what the term might mean, you don't equate it to anything you are experiencing. So that is the reason why I actually started this 5-book series, because I would write down terms like gaslighting, even like narcissism,
Hmm.
definitely parental alienation, but there was gray walking and there was low contact. And I mean, there's just so many terms I would write down with the intention to, hey, I'm going to look up what this means and see how it relates to my scenario. And before I knew it, I had 100 terms. And then it wasn't much longer. I had 1,000, and then 10,000. And that's when I said, boy, if this is helping me, try to understand this, I am going to put this in a book form for other people as well. And just like, people that have podcasts, or go on the speaking circuit, or um, write books, they've experienced things. And part of the healing for so many people is to turn around and give back to others, to help them on their journey, so that they can just be maybe a little step ahead of what you went through, so that to save them some sort of pain, even though we all have a journey to go through. So many of us know that our voices matter, and that we are helping people by sharing our stories, so others don't feel so alone and they can be a little bit more aware of what they're enduring.
Yes. And as you stated before, we can be educated, we can have great careers, we can be highly looked upon, and yet we can still be in a situation that is unhealthy.
Definitely.
And it's no fault of our own. It's something that happens, and these people are really good at just at what they do. I'll just leave it at that. They're very good at what they do.
Yeah, yep, they are. They're master
Yes.
manipulators.
Yes. So I have to ask, while you were in your marriage, did you ever have any signs that you should leave?
Oh my gosh, yes. I had signs even before I got married. There were times, I mean, one time even before we got married, I was accused. You know that these abusers use projection and blame
Hmm.
shifting. So they will accuse you of lying, cheating, and stealing, when really they're looking in the mirror at themselves, because they are the ones that lie, cheat, and steal. But it turns I mean, this is a little bit personal, but even before we got married, I was accused of having an STD, which
Hmm.
I hardly even knew what that was. I remember learning about them like in 5th grade in gym class, but I was accused of being promiscuous and giving him some sort of, I don't know, venereal disease or something like that, when really he was the one involved in other relationships, and we weren't married at the time. So really, it wasn't like there were vows,
Right.
before God that, he would be violating, although he had no problem doing that afterwards.
Mhm.
But that was just pretty shocking, even before we were married. And there was another time that I really, this is before we were married, that I really was very upset with him because I think I caught him in a lie, one of many lies. And I did not want to spend time with him. And we had plans for this very fancy dinner in downtown Chicago. And I was just like, cancel the plans. I don't want to go. But he would not take no for an answer. I mean, I was obviously very weak at the time because we ended up going. I had a miserable time. A lot of money was spent. But it was just like he had no regard to where I was at emotionally, and I that was definitely a red flag. And a
Yeah.
big one was at one point when we were very, very close. I kind of thought, okay, we are really headed after this longer courtship to marriage. I found out that while I was very involved with him and seeing him on a regular basis, his old girlfriend was living with him. She moved from another state and was living with him. Yeah, I was like, what? What do you mean she's living with you? And I later found out, I mean, it was so involved that she had a checking account at our bank and all of these things. And I immediately broke up with him, and said, no, thank you. But it wasn't much longer that I was love bombed, which, I really experienced that more so before I actually got married because, he was like, you are exactly the person I want to be with forever and ever. And I broke that off. And, I made sure I drove her to the train or the plane to go back to her state. And, and I believed it. I was young and I
Mhm.
was kind of swept away with, wow, he really chose me. And so that were a few examples of the red flags before we were married. But, while we were married, there was constant money manipulation. I made a very good salary as a teacher, and he made double that of mine in his line of work. But there was always just money issues, and it didn't make sense. It didn't add up, you know. So he was constantly taking out credit cards, or when you would get these checks in the mail that you could just write unlimited amounts, and that would be considered a loan. He would do that, and I'd be like, "Why are you doing that?" I had no idea where all the money was going, and as
Right.
it turns out, financial abuse is a major, major, major red flag for people in toxic situations, where they get you to where you don't even have a checking account. You're given an allowance to go to the grocery store to buy your essentials. I was made to believe that we didn't have much money. I don't even think I ever took my children to a shopping mall where all our neighbors, of course, would go on shopping excursions with their kids. I
Mhm.
would go to Goodwill or garage sales because I really felt like, I know we're living in this beautiful home, but it seems like we're always like we can't make ends meet for some reason, and that's part of the strategy. They're using, that money. So many of these people even have another family with someone else, and that's where the money is going. But they fund their addictions of pornography and gambling, and just their double life and triple life that costs money. So financial abuse is definitely a red flag that I experienced during the marriage, but just kind of didn't let it be the straw that broke the camel's back. I just worked
Right.
harder. I took on more jobs. I became extremely, frugal. And then that also led to, hey, I've got to work late. I have to advance my career. I need a luxury car. You just have, the beat up family car, and just realize I'm going to be gone many evenings and that type of thing, when really again, you believe that in you. So you think, okay, we're in this together. Let's focus on his career. Yes, of course, he has to have the luxury car. And you just sort of accept these things when really they keep testing you and testing you to see how much you will put up with. And at some point, I believe their mask just falls where they slip up, they confess to something, and the true colors are shown. And if you are finally at a point where you have had enough, or that um, although I think if my ex husband's mask didn't slip this one night over pizza, I would still be with him, because I was just going along, thinking, well, you know, this is how it is. But they do tell on themselves.
They do. Eventually, they absolutely do. So, did you ever have any messages or signs from, we'll say, spirit or the universe along the line that you should get out?
I don't believe so. I mean, unless you would count the gut feeling in your
Hmm.
stomach, and the conflict in your heart and your mind about,
Right.
you know, something just doesn't seem right here. So,
Yeah.
if that was a sign from the universe, I ignored it.
Right. Yeah. It's so interesting because sometimes we just need such a blatant sign that,
Right.
if we don't get that blatant sign that stops us in our tracks, we think that we're living the path that we're meant to live, or that we signed up for this and we're bound by God or whomever to live this life. And otherwise,
Right.
yeah, we're just
And we
stuck
have
there.
so much to consider too, like especially if you have children. You don't want to provide an unstable, you know, uh, environment for them. I mean, I had no idea that I would lose my adult children. I mean, we're going on almost a decade of not having them in my life. And, it is what it is. They've bought into that false narrative, you know. There's a lot of research that actually talks about parental alienation and the significant brainwashing that takes place that can get an adult child to completely align with the abusing parent. This is considered child abuse. But at
Absolutely.
some point, I had to take care of myself. I had to, the knowledge was really helpful, the research to help me understand the dynamics of what happens to these brains. um, but there's only so much I can do. And then when there's legal threats, which in my case were and continue to be, I continue to be harassed and stalked through the court system from my abuser. You basically don't want to engage, and at some point you have to sort of let it go and let God, and
Yes.
realize that we all have our journeys, and they're going to have to do that on their own. But yes, so there's so many things to consider why we stay in situations or make excuses, and children are part of it. And some people are not as fortunate as I was. I had a career, but they try, believe me, the abusers try to sabotage your work. They definitely sabotage your neighborhood relationships, your
Hmm.
family, your friends. They definitely sabotage your health because of the mental stress that you have gone through. And I'll tell you, after leaving and reclaiming my life, I moved from a lifetime in the Chicago suburbs. In the last 3 years, I've been living in the Caribbean, immersed in nature, and so at peace with myself and even the situation, realizing that I can't control what other people do. I can only pray for them and hope that they have a spiritual awakening, that they could maybe stop, being so mean to other people, and realizing that maybe they can find worth within themselves without putting other people down or sabotaging their lives.
Absolutely. Yes. I think that's a beautiful way to look at it. And I'm so happy you have peace now.
Oh,
That's so
most
important.
definitely. And the
Yes.
writing has been healing. And, I have found love again, and I have found hope. And I am actually in such a better place physically, emotionally, financially, spiritually than I ever was when I was in that 27-year marriage. So, really, I'd like to just, offer hope and inspiration to your listeners, because we all have challenges. Your challenge might not look exactly like mine or someone else's, but if we handle them with love and goodness and honesty and optimism, and a little bit of deep reflection about our own connection and role in things, and definitely research to understand personality disordered individuals and how this plays out. You really can get to a point of not only surviving, you can actually be thriving in a new
Yes.
life. And I feel like I've come, so I've come to that point. So it doesn't matter what the abuser will throw at me, and he continues to just be obsessed with trying to dim my light. It's not going to happen. I'm way past that.
Right. Yes. Oh, thank God for that. Yes,
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
Oh my goodness. So I want to circle back real quickly. I want everyone to read your book, God Came to My Garage Sale. By the way, your website is titled the same,
yep,
correct? God
yep,
Came to My Garage Sale. So you can find all of your books on your website.
yep.
I know you have mentioned that you've had several of these type of STE experiences. Would you mind sharing one more? I think it's really important for the listeners, if they're not so much into spirituality, that maybe we just give them a glimmer of hope for how we may be connected to the universe and how sometimes things play out.
Right. Well, so many common signs are like finding feathers at a
Hmm.
specific time when there's like no birds around or anything like that. I actually found some specifically colored feathers of a beautiful Australian shepherd dog that had passed away the night before that I was close to. And, I actually looked up these feathers to see in Illinois, are there any birds with this type of feathering? And there wasn't. And so I really believed that it was a message. And actually, when you actually correlate some experience to something spiritual, or a deceased loved one or something like that, usually your first reaction or your first thought is really spot on to what that is. So when I saw these feathers this one morning, my first thought was, oh my gosh, this is this wonderful dog telling me that they loved me and they appreciated the toys and treats I gave them. So that was my first thought. And then
Uh-huh.
it kind of was validated by the research that I did to see if there were feathers like this. Other people can find specifically dated pennies or dimes or quarters. People can hear songs on the radio that are very random and maybe not even related to the radio station that you are listening to, but it has a deep connection to you or someone trying to get a message. One amazing event that I had came through electronics, and that is a pretty common phenomenon where lights are flickering on and off.
Hmm.
Um, or that you can hear voices and that type of thing. I was at a nail salon getting a pedicure, and I was paying attention to this TV, and all of a sudden there was this infomercial for some very fancy, beauty cream. I think it's called Dr. Pericone's cream, something I would never buy for myself because of course, like I said before, I never believed I had enough money to buy fancy creams for myself. But a girlfriend of mine I was very close to had just passed away, and I was helping their family go through the belongings, and she had an unopened box of this beautiful, like a set of this cream, and I actually opened that up and put some cream on my face, kind of thinking that, okay, my deceased friend would want me to experience this cream.
Uh-huh.
But at the same time, I felt a little guilty, like, am I doing something wrong that I shouldn't do? But anyway, it was on my brain about this cream, and here is this infomercial, shortly after. So it really caught my attention, and I was like really paying attention to it. But just like all the experiences that I have had, time stood still. So, what really took place in a matter of five, at the most 10 minutes, to me felt like hours and hours or even days. That's how slow time stood still. And so I was mesmerized looking at this TV, and then all of a sudden it switched to what I believe to be a different infomercial about this town of Petersburg, Illinois. And that was the town that my girlfriend was from. And I had never gone to see her town, and we had plans to go see it, but it never worked out. And I didn't even think, again, everything was in slow motion, but I didn't even think to ask the person sitting next to me getting a pedicure, hey, are you seeing this infomercial about Petersburg and what's that all about? The infomercial to me went on for hours and hours and hours. And I was shown an aerial view of her town, like the main street.
Hmm.
I was shown an ambulance where there was this old lady, sitting with her feet hanging down at the back of this ambulance. And she was talking, and I just was like, what would she be talking about? But I was just focused on this, just sort of almost like an out of body experience. I was just so in tune to what I was seeing. And I did see an actual kind of sign on the bottom of the screen that said Petersburg, Illinois. And again, I would be like, what on earth would they be trying to sell or highlighting or something? It went on and on and on and on. And I finally came out of this kind of trance when the nail tech said to me, "What color nail polish do you want on your feet?" And I'm thinking, what? Like that had to have been, just like I said, 5 or at the most 10 minutes, at the most.
Right.
And I was transported to, another dimension, I believe, where there's no time. And actually, after doing a lot of research on STEs and NDEs, that is validated for me that there is no time on the other side. Time
Yes.
is not like what we experience here. So that was pretty amazing. And I really just kind of buried that experience. I didn't really immediately talk to anyone about it. I just thought, wow, I really experienced something. A few days later, I was back at my friend's house with her family, going through photographs and things like that. And all of a sudden, I saw a photograph of this lady that was on that infomercial,
Ah,
this old lady that was sitting at the back of the ambulance. It was the exact person. And I was like, it kind of like was a trigger. It jolted me to remember everything that I experienced at that nail salon. So I said to the family member, who is this person? They said, well, that was her best friend, this older lady named Maida. And I knew the name Maida because my friend had goats, and her favorite goat was named Maida. And now I know why. But it was almost like, I believe, that my deceased girlfriend was trying to show me, provide me closure and show me the town that she was, where she was from, and show me this best friend of hers that was a big part of her life. And after that experience, I actually went to a search engine on my phone and I looked up Petersburg, Illinois. And sure enough, the photograph that I saw, on my phone screen was the exact image of the aerial view I saw of that main street. So I just believe that I had a visitation from her, and I actually did have one other visitation from her, and that's another thing that people can experience. They can experience someone coming to the edge of their bed, or right in front of them, as if they are a real person right in front of them. You could reach out and touch them. I've had two of those experiences. I wouldn't have even believed it if I didn't actually experience it myself. So anyway, to let your audience know, those are some other things that happened to me that I write about, but that I think in many ways are very common for other people that have had these experiences.
right. Oh my goodness. Those are such moving stories. I want to thank you so much for sharing that. That's just wonderful. They're beautiful stories.
Well, it was an amazing thing that happened to me, and it was life changing. And it really, gave me the reassurance that, there's a bigger plan happening here. And that, I've even heard that maybe the abusers that we, or the toxic people or situations that we encounter, they could have been prearranged. Like we could have just arranged with this person to have this kind of life experience so we can experience the depth of these emotions that we have on earth, even if they're negative. And, that's
Yes.
one perspective, really. Or maybe we were someone who abused someone in a past life. And so now it's our turn to experience what that might have felt like.
Yes, absolutely. Soul contracts, and we come
Yeah,
to earth to play them out. Yes. And, I think when you look at it from that perspective, a lot of times it can be a lot easier to forgive and move on. In addition to that,
definitely.
like you said, I mean, you had the beauty and the wonder of having your home for 20 years to raise your children in. Or I always think of just having my beautiful children and
Right.
what a gift that is. I mean, there's always a gift in there somewhere and an experience to learn from.
Definitely, definitely. And it could be all part of the plan. But we have the power within ourselves to start to be aware. I mean, anyone that is listening to this and might resonate with some of the messages or experiences might be at a point in their life where they could be ready to get to the next level of this kind of healing journey, because at some point you're able to forgive. And it's not like you will welcome people that hurt you back into your life. No, that's not the case. You still need to put
Right.
up some healthy boundaries with even new people that you meet. But I have found that you've got to forgive yourself. Don't be so hard on yourself that you didn't see the red flags, or that you let so many years go by before you finally said, okay, I'm done. Give
Right.
yourself permission to realize that that was part of the journey. And then, what I have also found is healing is to realize that the abusers are very damaged and sick individuals. They weren't born this way. They had trauma of their own that they played out by hurting other people. And there might be an element of evil that's intertwined into all of this, but at the same time, God, it's wonderful to be removed from that toxic person or these other toxic people that you find that are uncovered after you realize that, yeah, you might even have a best friend that betrayed you, that you really didn't pay attention. Once you start realizing what people are capable of doing and how you accept it, then you can start seeing it easier in
Yes.
other relationships. And so then you have to make some big decisions about who you want in your life, who you keep in your life, and that's okay. But forgive yourself, and have some understanding of some of these other people. And I just believe in praying for them to have goodness just go through their soul. And so many of these people, especially with narcissistic behaviors, they don't change. They will go to their deathbed defending the false narrative. But
Hmm.
there are some that actually do realize, how their behavior and actions hurt so many people and want to make a change. But, that doesn't happen often. You can't really count on that. You really can just look at yourself and keep on growing to be the person that you are meant to be.
Absolutely. Oh, what a beautiful message you've shared with us today, Marnie.
Well, thank you for having such a great platform for this. And just even being vulnerable yourself and sharing your experiences too, because it's validating for us. Our voices do matter. We're not here complaining about it. We're just trying to provide hope and inspiration, by sharing our stories, because there are many other people that have experienced these things as well.
Absolutely. And even if somebody doesn't have a similar story, just showing resilience in difficult times, I think is so important. And I think that you've shared a lot of hope with our listeners today. And I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show. I truly appreciate it.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. Just such an honor to have a conversation with you.
Thank you. And again, if anybody wants to reach out to Marnie, you can find her at
It would be www.godcametomygaragesale.com.
Wonderful. And you can find all of her books there on her website.
Yep.
So thank you again, Marnie, and have a wonderful day.
All righty. You too, Gretchen.
Thank you so much for joining me today on the Spiritual Life Management Podcast. If you like the podcast, please show your support by leaving a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast to be notified of new episodes. And if you'd like to contact me, just send me an email at gretchensmithcoaching@gmail.com. Also, follow me on Instagram at Gretchen Smith Coaching for more inspiring content on creating your best life. Lastly, if you're interested in working with me for spiritual holistic life coaching, just send me an email or DM. All information is below in the show notes under Linktree. Sending you love and namaste.